Coming up on this week's Redcast.
Regulators have really doubled down on data quality. How do you get those moving set of facts described in a way that we can all understand what they mean? To me, is impossible without actually getting to open source.
There's this lack of strategic thinking, and it's really about the tactical implementation.
There's tons of money here. What is it that's breaking down? Why aren't they putting the resource into fixing this problem?
The cost of reconciling this, understanding, disambiguating the modeling is immense. If you're a firm and you find yourself in a position where you need to re-architect or remodel your data, you should really use this model because it is going to help you to have this the traceability, understand what's happening on the life cycle.
Welcome to Redcast. I'm PJ DiGiamarino, CEO and founder of JWG, and we're moving back on this episode to a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. We're going from technology as a risk itself to how does technology help overcome the problem of transparency to the economy overall. And I'm really pleased to have Pierre here with me today. Pierre, why don't you quickly introduce yourself?
Hi, PJ. I'm Pierre Kovacs. I worked at Endava. I've been with Endava for 2 years now. In previous roles, I was head of risk and regulatory technology at Daiwa. I was also the CTO of a fintech called Orchestrate. So many backgrounds in technology and 25 years of experience in banking and capital markets.
And another Redcast listener that we had the chance to bring onto the platform for this conference.
Absolutely, big fan.
Thank you. Well, thank you for following along. Anyway, let me give you the background quickly. We'll get into the questions as we see them, because we've been doing a lot of preparation and research in advance of our conference on the 7th of February. I think the question for us still comes down to how do we overcome the 2008 failure due to transparency, and regulators are have placed a lot of burden on firms to produce reports that really don't quite cut it. And there's been a lot of discussion about what's the right model for firms to display data to regulators and the way regulators should explain what data they need. The most pressing area for transparency has been derivatives. So in 2017, 2018, a group of international regulators got together and agreed with the standards bodies a set of fields. Now, those fields are being rolled out now. They include things like how do you identify the transaction, the UTI, or how do you think about the product, or UPI, and those kind of critical things one needs to know to be able to control risk in the system. The data hasn't really been up to scratch, and lots of different reports have come out and illustrated why. But regulators have really doubled down on data quality. We've seen a whole new effort with these new standards to get a lot more precise about what's necessary to be able to make sense of what's happening in the system. At the same time, things like the risk data aggregation principles have been reinforced. So people are looking for up-to-date data lineage back to the source of where you gave me a piece of data, but where did you get that from, and how do you prove that that's right? We also have efforts from regulators in the US, Europe, and UK to completely redo the system, to look at the Data Transparency Act in the US by 2029, the EU data strategy by 2028, in the UK transforming data collection program. And so this isn't an area that's going to stand still for long, but it's not balance sheet data. Mark data about the market data. It reflects a constantly moving economy and a whole set of innovation that really is hard to describe. So how do you get those moving set of facts described in a way that we can all understand what they mean? To me, is impossible without actually getting to open source and actually having a method to be able to exchange. This is what we think we're talking about. Now, the Bank of Italy's done a lot of good work in this space and helped summarize where we are in a big report they put out last year. They really came away with 3 potential models for how do you actually implement machine executable reporting. The first model was make the banks create a mandatory layer of data, which can be aggregated, by the central bank. So force banks to actually, pull data up for their regulators. The second was having a non-mandatory layer, which was the bank's problem, and they had to figure out how they wanted to aggregate it. And then the third was actually a very standardized layer, like the common domain model, but sent to the cloud. So everyone had to work off the same data. Very different types of solutions, but it all gets down to one question: what's mandated by whom, and what happens if I don't do it? So the big question for me, Pierre, here, coming back to your experience, is what does it take for a firm to even think about any of these options today? And what's the typical approach to upgrade their current infrastructures to be compliant?
Yeah, that's a big question, and you're right. The regulator seems to be always asking for more data, for more context, and there's a bit of balance to strike as what you're going to receive and what you might need in the future, maybe to investigate or to do the proper market oversight, or by the FCA, or have maybe the Bank of England to use also this data for other things. So what does it take for the firms to take a good approach? So in my experience, since you're asking about my experience, what we see is there's still a lot of firms where regulatory reporting is allocated a budget because it's mandatory requirement. So there's a mandatory budget, but often it's a very minimal budget. And sometimes there's not even dedicated regulatory teams. Sometimes they need to find some volunteers from other teams. So that's what I hear. And sometimes there's a bit of frustration because there's this lack of strategic thinking, and it's really about the tactical implementation. So how do I get through the next regulatory change, and which means that then later on you have to deal with some remediations of the previous regulation. And I think that's the idea of if we can move to a more strategic approach, try to think ahead to get these regulatory requirements done cheaper and faster, and not just when the regulation changes, but also when your business changes. Maybe you're going to want to trade some derivatives that you were not trading earlier, and you need to adapt your reporting for that. So
I guess Pierre, that's the big thing, right? Which is that this process of reporting sucks up an awful lot of resource, a lot of expensive resource at that. I mean, you need people very deep in the market activity to get together, talk about standards, agree, and report. It boggles my mind that your opening statement was that they don't put budget into this, because there's tons of money here. What is it that's breaking down? Why aren't they putting the resource into fixing this problem?
So I think because one of the reasons is also because the problem is not just at the regulatory function level, right? If you had, for example, if you had the perfect investment book of record, cross asset, with all the data aggregated, with all the proper modelization, with your product, your events, your the contract. If all this was modeled properly, and then you could build on top of that your regulatory reporting, well, it would be extremely fast and cost effective, because you would immediately have the opportunity to mutualize across the different regulation that you mentioned. I think you didn't mention, but we were talking about EMIR, MiFIR, SFTR, BCBS 239. You were talking about risk, and so there's a problem, because I think there's also the legacy, and there's an impedance mismatch between the way you're modeling your models, even internally, between your different business lines, and how the other firms are doing that. And and then suddenly there's the cost of reconciling this, understanding, disambiguating the modeling is immense.
So it is that model that's the problem. There's not
It's the model, and
it's the ability to have one model that's the problem. We have lots of different models in each of the silos.
Yeah, right, exactly. And there's we can see standardization is very powerful, and we see that some of the data standards have been a really fantastic progress, whether it's FIX, FPML, ISO 20022. But there's a need to go maybe one abstraction above this, to have this common domain model. I think that's why you were getting at, and having this common model, and more importantly, and when we say common, that means something that everybody in the industry can focus on. And when we collaborate, because in the past, historically, it's been relatively difficult to collaborate on these topics for various reasons, because it's complicated to share some of the data that needs to be anonymized, because also it's, to some extent, some people see that as a competitive advantage, etc. But
we're not sharing the data, right? We're reporting it to
absolutely
the party. And I guess that's the bit I don't understand. So we've had a language called FPML that's been out there for decades, right? It's never really been adopted en masse because each firm wanted to do it slightly differently. Doesn't it make sense for regulatory and for clearing and for settlement and the things that you do together, that you actually need to have a common model?
Yeah, absolutely. I really believe that the power in this common model, even if we're still in the early days of adoption. We started, I think it's 2017 or 2016, but now we have, I think there's all this infrastructure, this governance. We have where ICMA is DISLA on top of that. I think now everybody is able to contribute to this model, to this open source model, and this ability that we crystallize our efforts and focus our efforts on this model. I think this is the power of this common model, and I think this also what I've seen. I had to implement. I built several system and portfolio management systems in my career, and I've seen how they change over the years. And 30 years where swaps were like an exotic product. You would keep your product in your portfolio until maturity, and there was relatively little regulatory reporting. Well, that means that the systems were also relatively. The modeling in these systems was relatively simple. Now we have we need to deal with corporate actions, all these life cycle events, partial termination, step in, step out. That happens all the time, right, in the product. And this common model has the answers to that. The way that's one part that I love in the common domain model is the way they model the events. And I think that's very powerful. And I think that even internally, if you're a firm and you find yourself in a position where you need to re-architect or remodel your data, you should really use this model, because it is going to help you to have this the traceability, understand what's happening on the life cycle of your product.
That's the big difference here, right? It's not a data model. We're not trying to force everybody on a common data model, and I think no regulator would ever want that, because that would create infinite amount of risk everywhere if everyone was working off the same view of the system. But what this does then is gives you a way to glue things together, if I listen to what you're saying. So ultimately, it gets down to how standardized is that glue? Mm-hmm. And are the regulators going to use the glue language when they come in and talk to you about what some of the data and what they observed, and are able to actually trace that back through to the underlying systems? Do you think there's enough of a push right now from the regulators to adopt this glue?
It's still the early days, but we see. I think it's going to, as there's more collaboration, as we see these artifacts and the different implementations being made available in the open source system. I think this is what is really going to help the adoption. How much the regulator can push on that? That's a good question. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think what I've seen is the regulators reticent to actually endorse this as a particular language to talk about the rules that they've created. It's maybe a step too far right now.
Mm-hmm.
That might be something that we can change down the road, or they would look at changing. But that leaves us in a position of having a tiny bit of uncertainty. I guess what I see, and when I talk to different firms, I'd be interested in your perspective, because you also talk to lots of firms, is it's the ones that are most invested in re-engineering, re-architecting, they're paying the most attention to the common domain model at the moment. The ones that think they have everything sorted and they've got their, they'll take it in, they'll think about using it as a risk model, but they're not going to do like a wholesale adoption exercise right now. Is that the kind of perspective that you would share?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, I think there's some value in the common domain model beyond just the trade and transaction reporting problem. So I think that's what also we need to come to that realization, and the problem of exposing your data in a way that is going to be flexible is not just in the field of transaction reporting. There are firms that have invested in their data architecture also to expose the data to their clients, and you don't necessarily know what your clients are going to want to see, what data they're going to want to see, and they try to go through this more self-service model. So I think this is exactly the same trend. The problem is where do you start, right? Because we need to be pragmatic. We need to be realistic here. Every firm has their own, their core legacy. Maybe they have third-party systems that are relatively close, and maybe they have different, business lines. So how do you start to this first step towards this common model, and also one thing that maybe we haven't really discussed, one thing that is really also important is often the legacy system are just focused on the data, and they tend to forget about the metadata. And you were talking about data lineage, being able to track the life of your data and the source of your data. But there's also, you also want to be able to automate a lot of things on top of this, or policies, and this is where you're going to need your metadata, and that means you also need to think about the architecture for your metadata. That's one thing and there's plenty of AI powered tool that can help you to do the heavy lifting, to do the first step in that direction as well. And when we talk about CDM and DR, there's a big emphasis on the ontology layer. So understanding the semantic of the data and avoid the ambiguity. You can have, sometimes I've seen how many models I've seen where you see the word user. What is the user? Is the user the system? Is it the investor? What is it? And we need to avoid that. We have having this ontology layer, understanding the relationship between the entities. It's extremely complex, but if we manage to crack that, once and for all with this model, and again, there's plenty of tools, and AI can help a lot to do the heavy lifting for you. I think this is achievable. I think this is definitely the direction to go.
Yeah, and I think when I listen to you talk, I hear echoes of all the chief data officers I've been speaking to in the past year as well, because I think they're really excited. The data community gets a lot out of the common domain model because it gives them a reference point. It gives them a way to talk about the business, the events, and they've got their data models. They've got their clouds, they have their lakes, they have all the stuff that they need. What they need is those reference points, and they need to be able to turn around and prove that the information that they have is up to date and valid. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, this is a boon for the data community, and really should help them bed down a lot of the practices that we've been talking about being a bit wanting over the years.
Absolutely. I think that's also one that's a domain that is really exciting, because if you manage to build the right reporting model, I mean that means that you have a system that is secure. You need to control the access, that is resilient. You want to make sure that is also you will meet your timelines, that is robust, scalable, because the volumes just keep increasing, plus the history of data. I mean you almost pull all the quality attributes that you want in any perfect system. So I think that's why I say it goes well beyond just the threat reporting. I think it's really anchored really also deeply in the data management strategy of the firms.
Yeah, and ultimately, it's not, the story doesn't end here with these derivative reports, right? And we'll have plenty of other conference topics on where we'll be talking about the prudential reporting and the IREF, the integrated reporting framework, and the banking industry reference data program. A lot of the prudential statistical side is all very excited about. And there's a fit here because as we talk about it at the conference, there's a crossroads, right? There's all the transactional information needing to be observed from a higher level, a higher perspective.
There's ESG as well. I mean, I know during the conference you're also going to talk about ESG, and the ESG is such a good example of where there's a need for standardizations, where we're trying to harmonize the taxonomy and you don't realize that some data they report over a different time period, etc. And so I think that's really, that applies to all the domain in general.
Yeah, and we've had tremendous response to the research we've been putting out in our hackathon last year on ESG using the Finos Legend platform. It is a great way to think about how do you roll up all this data quickly using open source tooling. So yeah, completely agree. There's a reporting, as much as there's an AI theme across the conference, there's a reporting theme this year.
Exactly.
And it's all underpinned by data. So those are really the three big things that we're looking to get out of the conference this year. But I think we're running short on time for this discussion, Pierre. Why don't you sum up for us? Well, what are some of the key messages that you'd be giving to people that are on the fence about whether to come spend the hour to watch one of the panels? What's your call to action for, hey, come leave your office, come to join us on the 7th of February?
So I think you get more than you expect. I think you get answers to more than just if you come to the trade reporting panel, you probably get ideas that go well beyond the trade reporting, probably with also how to deal with the core legacies, we at Endava we can help with review, with building, with testing. So we'd love to see you all there.
Thanks very much. And we will have booths there. There'll be lots of good chances to talk to people that really have dirt under their fingernails in this space. And I'm really looking forward to the three banks and the trade header folk that have been working on the common domain model participating on this particular panel. But that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much for listening, and please follow up with regtechconference.co.uk. You'll find all the research for the topics we've been mentioning there. We'll put the link in the show notes for you, but also then look out for more our mailers and our LinkedIns that help get you there. But we'll look forward to seeing as many of you as we can on the 7th of February. Thanks, Pierre.
Thanks, PJ.
Thank you for listening. And if you've enjoyed the content, please like us so more people can join the conversation. Download all our episodes via all the major platforms. Come to the JWG website, which is jwg-it.eu, and follow our LinkedIn groups.